Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last spring training episode of the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. That means we finally have clarity, we have understanding, and we have, by the time this podcast drops, one more day until we get to watch Minnesota Twins baseball. So, Matt, how are we feeling about that?
Feeling pretty good. I feel like this is the first week where we've had kind of a lot to talk about. We're gonna have to go through it quick, but we love to hear that we have some news and should be a lot of entertaining stuff ahead. Certainly looking forward to the games mattering, and we're starting to have a better understanding of who's going to be playing in those games.
Yeah, I have spent all spring training assuming that these moves they were going to make throughout spring training were gonna actually happen and come, and then they didn't, and they didn't, and I guess it's not super surprising that they waited until the last like 3-4 days before opening day to make all of these moves. But I guess I'm more just disappointed because I feel like it ends up being pretty low wattage moves in the end. So the big news we have, I would say the top of the order is the Twins did end up releasing Andrew Chafin and Liam Hendriks. Both are phenomenal stories, great veteran leadership presences for spring training, but ultimately what we saw on the mound in game was not matching what the Twins were looking for in their bullpen. So are you surprised?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm surprised. I think Chafin was an obvious cut. He was averaging only 86 on his fastball throughout spring training. We talked when he got signed about how his velo was down considerably from the rest of his career, and that lowered velo was around 90 miles per hour. And so losing 4 ticks off of that, it was just never going to play against major league hitters. I kind of thought that they would keep Hendricks around, not only because his stuff looked okay, but they also just have so few right-handed relievers. I thought they'd give him a shot. But even still, I mean, his fastball velocity was like 93, 94, and at peak he was averaging 98. So losing, 4 or 5 ticks, I think it was probably unlikely that he was going to be super successful. So I think the Twins probably just came to that same realization.
Yeah, I think the bigger difference for me is that Hendricks had a lot more room to fall off and still be serviceable in some manner. Like Andrew Chafin was not the pitcher that Liam Hendricks was at his peak, and he has probably fallen off just as far in their declining careers. So I think Chafin had to almost show improvement coming into camp, and when we saw the reduced fastball, it wasn't there. I also thought that Hendricks had a much better chance at holding on to one of those last spots, mainly because we still don't have 1,000,000% clarity who those last spots are going to go to now, but it's looking like it might be Dan Altavilla, who looked fine in the World Baseball Classic. I mean, he's had a okay spring training, but I don't really see anything in Dan Altavilla or Zach Kent if he gets the last spot. That makes me think, wow, we really need to see this guy over Liam Hendricks.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with Liam Hendricks, and I think tying back to Andrew Chafin, like Hendricks' whole profile for pretty much the majority of his career has been an overpowering, bullying fastball. And so him losing fastball velocity like affects him more than most pitchers just because that's what he's relied on. Chafin throughout his career has been more of a breaking ball specialist who's also had a decent enough fastball. And so even if they've declined a similar amount in velocity, I would argue that it affects Hendricks even more just because that was the one clear thing that set him apart from the pack. And yeah, I agree with your assessment of the rest of the options. Zach Kent was a waiver claim pretty recently. Dan Altavilla was available as a minor league free agent. They also have Cody Lawyerson, who pitched a little bit for them last year. Also, a minor league signing for the Twins. So it's kind of an uninspiring group. I think at some point we'll see guys like Travis Adams, John Klein, and Mark Araya start to filter up and take those roles. But I mean, in all reality, we're talking about the seventh and eighth spots in the bullpen, and these are guys who are going to be throwing low leverage anyways.
Yeah, if anything, I think we should probably be happy or at least okay with how the bullpen turned out overall entering the season. Obviously, we knew this is going to look atrocious after we traded away anybody with a lively arm last trade deadline. I mean, Cody Funderburk and Cole Sands and Justin Topa were immediately our three highest leverage arms. And right now, that still pretty much rings true. We've been kind of trying to make guesses at who the closer might end up being. A lot of people think it's going to end up being Taylor Rogers just because of his pedigree and maybe his history with the Twins as well. But even as far as beat writers like Gleeman and Hayes are saying, there really is no pecking order in this bullpen right now. So, what do you make of what we have?
Yeah, I think probably we'll see a combination of Taylor Rogers and Justin Topa in the ninth inning primarily. I think Cole Sands is pretty firmly their highest leverage reliever. I think they'll use him as kind of a fireman, whenever they have a fire to be put out, a high leverage situation, he'll be coming in. And then they'll leave the ninth inning to a couple of guys who have some experience back there. Rogers, obviously, a lot more than Topa. But that's kind of what I would expect. I will say, I think it's interesting that the Twins did decide to go with three lefties. Obviously, for the early part of spring, when we thought Chafin was still in the mix, we were talking about a four lefty bullpen. But even just having three is notable. It just sets them up to kind of get exploited by right-handed hitters. They're going to be in situations where they just have to throw these guys in unfavorable matchups. And I think that could backfire for this team. But I mean, when you have no good right-handed options, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at how they came to build this bullpen because we were texting about it a bit yesterday, and you mentioned that only what was that? I think four of these guys have been actual additions this offseason, either via free agency or trade.
Yeah, I think it was only three. It was Rogers, Orzi, and Banda.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know how we'd qualify a guy like Altavia, who was a minor league free agent signing. Like he's kind of whatever. But really, there's only three guys here that pitched for the Twins last year that will make the bullpen this year, and that is Sands, Funderburk, and Topa. And we said when the offseason started that the Twins could go out and get eight new relievers. Their bullpen was so bad. The guys that ended the season in the pen last year were so atrocious that you could have reasonably thought the Twins would go out and get eight new relievers to entirely rebuild the bullpen. And they almost did. Five ace of these guys are new faces to the bullpen. And yet somehow this doesn't feel anything close to fresh, inspired, or competitive still.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a lot better than the mix that was out there, in August and September last year. I mean, we saw Thomas Hatch and Erasmo Ramirez throwing like kind of high leverage innings. And so it won't be that bad. I still have some faith that Cole Sands can regain his 2024 form. Maybe Justin Topa could be a low end setup man, decent middle reliever. Kind of thinking the same for Taylor Rogers. Banda's been pretty good the last couple years. I think he's gotten lucky, but he's a serviceable setup man. I think it's lacking in top end talent. We don't have obviously a clear cut closer or someone that you really trust in high leverage roles. But I think it's a major league bullpen, and you got to hope that we can have some of these young guys come up and kind of push it to be a positive or even just like a net neutral thing. But it's not an embarrassing bullpen like it was down the stretch.
I guess if you want to put on the rose tinted glasses, you have a lot of the archetypes you would look for in a bullpen here. You have the veteran with closing experience that you can lean on in Taylor Rogers. You have Cody Funderburk, who is relatively young and relatively promising. We're going to stretch relatively there with how he ended last season and has pitched in spring training. You've got Cole Sands, who's the right handed version of that. And then you've just got, I mean, a guy like Banda, who's just your very, very typical extreme lefty platoon pitcher. And then a whole bunch of just older guys, I guess, floating around trying to reestablish themselves. Like, this looks like a normal bullpen. It's just like the bottom percentile outcome for pretty much every archetype you would hope for.
Yeah, and I think too, like when we've been talking about this bullpen, kind of the assumption all along has been that they'll move some of these starting pitching prospects into relief roles, and that just hasn't happened. Like, yes, We've seen them do that with Travis Adams. It sounds like John Klein will probably do the same. They did that with Marco Raya. But other than that, like those were all pretty marginal prospects to begin with. And they still are stretching out Kendry Rojas and Connor Prelip. They still haven't decided to move David Festa to the bullpen. I know he's hurt right now, but they were going to build him up as a starter. And then outside of that, they've also had the Pablo injury, which has significantly weakened their starting pitching depth. And so I don't know that there's that much help coming. I could definitely see 5-6 weeks from now, David Festa is healthy, his shoulder's feeling good, and the Twins say, Festa's not going to get built back up as a starter. He's going to be our big addition to the bullpen. And that would make me feel a lot better about things. But just overall, like the pitching feels a lot thinner than we hoped it would be at this point. And I think throughout the course of the season, that'll like continue to be the case. And if we're already having questions about not only the quality, but the depth of both our reliever and starting pitching group, and it's March, I can't imagine it's looking any better in June, July, August.
Well, notably, I noticed you did forget to mention that Matt Cantorino is progressing well through his rehab and will resume pitching at some point in 2026. So that alone might just save all of our bullpen issues.
Yeah, Matt Cantorino, he of the 40 professional innings in the last like 6 seasons.
No, I also think that the Twins are kind of hinting at the exact game plan that you just laid out there because, as we mentioned, we have a lot of certainty now. I think pretty much the entire roster outside of this bullpen is set. And I think there's a reason that the bullpen is not set still. And it's because even if the Twins know that they're not necessarily going to start the season with Travis Adams and John Klein and Marco Raya and David Festa in the bullpen for whatever reason, they, I think, definitely want to be getting those guys in there as soon as they can. I'm sure that Travis Adams, as soon as he's healthy, will immediately make the jump up. But then it's also got to be a little tough to find guys who are willing to sign on, knowing that, hey, the Twins have made it very clear that once Travis Adams is healthy, I don't have a spot in this bullpen anymore. If I'm signing here, it's maybe only going to be for 4 weeks and maybe 6 appearances. Is that really worth it? So I imagine there's got to be at least a little bit of that at play as the Twins try to finalize things too now.
Yeah, but I mean, I think any of the guys that they would bring in are kind of the marginal, like minor league signing, Dan Altavia, Zach Kent type of guys, where like you're just looking for playing time, and even if it comes in a 4 or 6 week stretch right at the beginning of the year, that's still major league service time. That's a lot of money, and it's a chance to show that you can compete against big league hitters. So I definitely think that like if they're approaching free agents and saying, "Hey, we might not have a season long spot for you. We're not going to give you a guaranteed contract, but you'll make the team out of camp." I think that's pretty appealing to teams or to players. Excuse me. I also think we're going to see teams start to cut down to their 26-man rosters, and there might be some interesting relievers that re-enter the market. We've already seen that with a number of guys, and so I think there's the possibility that the Twins pick up a guy from another team and then they make the roster, and that changes their plans a little bit. But yeah, like you said, I think these last couple spots in the pen are probably going to get cycled through quite a bit this season, and guys will have opportunities to show that they can pitch well and move up into that more set in stone group in the bullpen. But at least to start, it's probably going to be a really nebulous and not very good section of the roster.
Yeah, I like that you just touched on the guys graduating to set in stone territory because I'm looking at this projected bullpen, and I think you could say that Sands and Topa and Rogers and probably Eric Orzi are set in stone guys that are going to have semi moderately long leashes at least to go out and throw. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say that if somehow the opening day roster includes both Zach Kent and Dan Altavia, that they're both on the shortest possible leash. I think you could also say that the Twins maybe don't really expect to rock with three left-handed relievers for a large portion of the season. And rather than make that decision now, they're just going to do it at the start of the season, give themselves more time to differentiate between the three and decide which one they don't want to run with. So maybe we do see Cody Funderburk get optioned if he gets off to a slow start to start the season. So even though we are seeing a lot of names that we've been talking about all off season that we thought were kind of penciling in, I don't think any of them are particularly safe from a bad opening to the season.
Yeah, I will say I would add Anthony Banda for sure to that set in stone group. The Twins traded $500,000 in international signing money for him. That's pretty decent prospect or a couple of prospects that you can sign with that money. And so they definitely have plans for him. He's a guy who in the last 2 seasons has like a 3.1 ERA. Obviously, the underlying stats aren't quite as gleaming as that, but there's definitely a reason they acquired him. I don't think they'd cut bait right away. And then I'll also say it sounds like the Twins told Cody Funderburk back in February that he was going to make this roster out of camp. I think Dan Hayes reported that today when the Twins announced that Funderburk was on the opening day roster. And so, if we're talking about a guy who has known for 2 months he's going to be on the opening day roster, that's a guy that they have a lot of faith in and they probably see as one of the set in stone options. So, I mean, I think they probably have those top 6 spots at least for the opening, month or two, pretty well locked in.
I mean, I would like to believe in Cody Funderburk, and he, as I mentioned earlier, has shown some of the most promise of anybody still left in this bullpen. But at the same time, he's still the third lefty, I would say for sure, in a three lefty bullpen, which is a really weird setup. I just don't know that he's super safe from, say, 10 appearances by the end of April. If he gives up a run in five of them, they might be like, hey, we just cannot afford to kill this roster spot on a guy who is only a 50-50 shot at getting his job done when he is the third and most redundant pitcher in our bullpen.
I will say, so looking at roster resource, the Twins 3 projected left-handed relievers. Cody Funderburk has the lowest projected ERA at a 3.86. Then it's Taylor Rogers at a 4.13, and then it's Anthony Banda at a 4.34. So at least by projections, it looks like Cody Funderburk's actually like the number one lefty. I don't necessarily agree with that, but so the projections say. And actually, Cody Funderburk has the lowest projected ERA of any Twins reliever. So I think that's more of an indicator of where the rest of this group is at. But he is one of our better options.
I am actually all behind that. I would not be surprised if we can bet on one thing out of the bullpen. That would be it. But if it's not Funderburk, I think the odds of all three of these guys getting through even the first month of the season looking great separately is just so slim because of, again, all the hoops that you have to jump through to get them into the game. I feel like if you're going to run with three lefties in the bullpen, you simply cannot protect them platoon wise altogether. Some of these guys are going to have to end up facing at least a healthy amount of righties, if not predominantly righties, out of the bullpen, simply because we have to throw somebody to finish every game. And so I think that even if a guy like Taylor Rogers is the one who gets tasked with being the platoon neutral lefty and going out there and getting out righties as non-discriminately as lefties, and he can't do it, he might have to go. It's painful. I would love to see him have a resurgent year in Minnesota, but it's just so ridiculous to carry three lefties in this pen, and if they aren't all three performing, there's absolutely no value to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made that instead of trading $500,000 in international spending money and giving $2 million to Taylor Rogers, we could have combined those two, gone after a little bit more expensive of a reliever that maybe they have to trade for from the left side, and have one higher quality option versus two lesser quality options. The guy I'm thinking of is Matt Strom. He's been a pretty elite left-handed reliever for the last few years, and he's also a guy who can give you a little bit of length from the left side, can get righties out. And he got traded to the Royals pretty early in the offseason, for really not a whole lot, and he's making a pretty reasonable salary. I think, I mean, it's not ideal, the situation the Twins have put themselves in. They've kind of gone, well, they haven't really gone for quantity or quality, but it's definitely been more quantity over quality. And I think that's a mistake just because there's not a whole lot of quality to be had in this group. Speaking of quantity and a lot of redundant options, the Twins outfield mix is starting to come into a clearer view. So the Twins today optioned Alan Roden to AAA. That means that our starting outfield mix will include James Outman. I think that was always likely, just because the Twins obviously see something with him. They gave him a lot of playing time down the stretch, and they traded Brock Stewart straight up for him. And so it would be a little surprising for them to cut bait on Outman straight out of camp. And I also think there wasn't really a situation where they would feel comfortable having four left-handed hitting outfielders on this roster all at the same time. So I'm not super surprised that this happened, but I do think Alan Roden is probably one of the better hitters on this team, and I don't love him spending time in AAA, especially when he's kind of already proven everything that you'd need him to prove. So, Eric, what are your thoughts on Alan Roden being sent down?
Yeah, that's the more disappointing part. I can live with Outman making the roster mainly because I he is a true defensive center fielder. He is a plus asset as a defender in center. Whereas if you don't keep Outman around, you have a whole host of guys who maybe could be your center fielder. Like you could play Alan Roden out in center field, but you don't really want to get him broken in there as a full time center fielder. And even if you do, he's not giving you even James Outman level defense. But it is really unfortunate that it had to come at the expense of Roden, especially because the Twins made it a priority to clear room in the outfield for him last season after he came over at the trade deadline. They, with pretty much the same exact outfield room intact, were still keeping him up in the major leagues, trying to get his bat into the lineup every day and letting him develop at the major league level because they agreed that he's shown everything that he needs to or possibly could at AAA. He followed that up by having a phenomenal spring training, and now even with this same exact outfield room, they all of a sudden have decided that they don't have room for Alan Roden in the outfield and on the opening day roster. So I want to know what changed because he has looked like arguably the best outfielder in, I mean, Byron Buxton was in the WBC, so he didn't really play in spring training, but he looked like the best outfielder of that group in spring training. So what more can he do to get playing time?
Yeah, I think what changed is that James Outman ran out of options. So, like, if your two scenarios are you keep Outman and you option Roden, or you keep Roden in the big leagues and you're going to lose James Outman on waivers, just from like an organizational talent standpoint, it makes more sense to retain more talent, keep it in your organization. That's also assuming that you expect James Outman to be, a positive value player at any point, which he hasn't been since his rookie year in 2023. So I think the big thing here is that the Twins obviously have some faith in James Outman being a productive player and bouncing back. If they didn't, they wouldn't have traded for him and they wouldn't be keeping him on the roster now. But I just don't agree with that assessment. And it's going to come to the detriment of Alan Roden. And also, like, it's important for Alan Roden to show that he can contribute and hit in the big leagues right now because soon, like, not only will you have to get Alan Roden playing time, but you'll also have Emmanuel Rodriguez and Walker Jenkins who will need major league playing time this year. Plus, you already have Larnick and Wallner in the corner outfield spots slash DH. Like, there's going to be a lot of guys to have get at bats. And so, like, it makes sense early in the year when the two prospects aren't ready. You play Alan Roden, you see what you have in him, and if it doesn't work, well, then maybe one of these young kids can play. But like, it just seems like a detriment to everyone involved to keep James Outman around in a pretty limited role and not see what you have in Alan Roden just so that you can keep James Outman, who's unlikely to be a good player for you.
Yeah, it's certainly not a great introduction to Jeremy Zoll as a decision maker. I think this is, you could argue, one of the first big decisions he's had to make so far. The big thing to me, I mean, this does go back pre Jeremy Zoll. He wasn't really given any wiggle room out of this. It goes back, I hate to say it because we've been doing it all off season, and I'm so ready for us to play real baseball so we can talk about Trevor Larnach in any other capacity. But we knew this was going to be an issue before we even tendered him a contract. That's why everybody and their mother assumed that Trevor Larnach would not receive another contract with the Twins this offseason, because we knew as far back as February that if you tender Trevor Larnach, then all of a sudden you really have no other room for James Outman because he can't just be your generic fourth outfielder. You If you have James Outman on the roster with Trevor Larnach, then you also have very limited DH flexibility. And on top of that, you really don't have room for a fifth outfielder. Like, we just knew that we were going to run into a numbers issue, and that was without guys like Gonzalez or Emmanuel Rodriguez looking so good in AAA, or in not AAA, spring training. I am not shocked that neither of them made the opening day roster. I think they both have a lot to benefit from going back to AAA, but they also both looked really good in spring training. And if the Twins were serious about wanting to be good this year and serious about buying into a lot of the MLB's player promotion incentive programs, I see no reason that a team like the Twins shouldn't look at Emmanuel Rodriguez and say, hey, he can be our left fielder in left-handed or against left-handed pitchers when Trevor Larnach is out of the lineup entirely, and he can be our backup center fielder, and he can play 130 games this year and get 400 or 500 at bats and win AL Rookie of the Year. If you believe that he can continue to do what he did in spring training all season, then he very well could, because that's plus defense across all three outfield spots while you're getting an above league average bat. That is like an easy front runner for Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of beating the dead horse at this point. Like, we all know Trevor Larnach coming back is probably not the smartest use of resources, and they have a million left-handed hitting outfielders to play over him. But I think this just further underlines like how they chose to give Trevor Larnach, I think like 4.5, 4.6 million. And we're talking about how the bullpen is deep on options, but like pretty light on quality. Well, if you added, 4.6 million to what they gave Taylor Rogers, which was 2 million, you're in the realm of signing, a guy like Pierce Johnson or Sean Armstrong to a 1 year deal. These aren't world beating relievers, but these are solid setup men who pitch right handed. And at that point, you could have Funderburk and Banda be a pretty traditional two lefty setup. You would have another solid right handed reliever that you could have throw high leverage innings. Like, that would be a better use of resources. It fills out the roster better. It allows you to play the young guys. That would have been infinitely preferable. And it's just a very strange setup that the Twins have taken here.
Yeah, I guess as we're about to see when these games start, the one upside is that there's not a lot of attachment in this bullpen. If the Twins play well, these guys are going to continue to get a job as long as that happens. But I do think that we both have a lot of options to replace them, and we have the relative ease of moving on from most of these guys to make that happen. So that's what I'm most excited about, to see games actually get played, is that we can do a lot of talking, a lot of projecting, and a lot of dreaming and scheming in spring training, but it's the same thing we said when the first game started, when pitchers and catchers reported to camp. The end of the day, spring training doesn't mean a lick of anything for how the 2026 season is going to go. So at the very least, we are going to get answers soon.
Yeah, another piece of the outfield mix that I think is becoming more clear. So with Alan Roden getting sent down, I think in my mind he was the other main competitor in the left field mix, and we saw Austin Martin today make his re-debut into the lineup after his concussion, and I think he's probably just going to be the everyday left fielder. Maybe he platoons a little bit with James Outman, where Outman will play against right-handed pitching, but it looks like that's going to be Austin Martin's job. Obviously, he played well in August and September last year, but I still just don't think he has the bat to be an everyday left fielder. And it just seems like a very low upside move to have him playing regularly. And if he's playing every day in left field, you still are going to have to play at least one left-handed hitting outfielder in every lineup that you put out there. Like if you are facing a left-handed pitching, like a left-handed pitcher, like the Twins are on opening day, that means Matt Wallner is going to play right field, or Trevor Larnach's going to play right field, even if they do get creative with Caratini and Jeffers, and have one of those guys DH. There's just always going to be a poor defensive left-handed hitting outfielder playing in a corner against a left-handed starting pitcher, which means that for that game, that position is going to provide like pretty significant negative value because they're going to be bad defensively and they're also not going to hit. And so I just feel like it's a very weird setup from like a roster construction standpoint. At least if you had Alan Roden on this roster instead of a guy like Trevor Larnach, Roden can be a positive defender even if he's not hitting well. I mean, I guess you could say the same for Outman, but he's a terrible hitter against right-handed pitching. If you put him against a left-handed pitcher, like it's going to be abysmal. It's going to be like Ryan Kreidler level of offense. And Ryan Kreidler's also on this roster. So like the Twins have built a starting lineup that I think will score a decent number of runs. Like they have a lot of pretty decent hitters, especially adjusted for position. But the problem is almost all of their hitters are bad defenders and poor base runners. And so they really have to hit. And then all their backups are like the inverse, where it's like they play good defense, they can't hit at all. But that's like we just have no complete players. Like our only complete all around good player is Byron Buxton, and everyone else, it's like, oh, Luke Keeschel can't play defense, but he can hit. We don't really know if Royce Lewis can hit, but he can play decent defense. Oh, Ryan Jeffers can like kind of catch and be passable, but he can hit for a catcher. And it's just like this doesn't all work together. I'll get off my soapbox, but this is so strange.
We do not have 5 tool players here in Minnesota. We have 5 players with 1 tool, and together they make still not as much success as one 5 tool player. But I do want to double back real quick. Even when we were talking about, if Alan Roden made this team over, we talked about him making it over Larnach, over Outman. Yes, I agree that Austin Martin is stretched as an everyday left fielder. I'm not super excited to see that. But in general, I do want to stunt for Austin Martin again. I do like seeing him on the roster. I don't think he is a regular in any successful lineup, but to me, he is a fantastic super utility fourth outfielder type of guy to have on a roster. He has fine speed, enough speed where I would say he could pinch run for at least half of this roster right now. He is not a terrible hitter. He's not going to wow you, but if he can look like the Austin Martin we saw post trade deadline last year when he got everyday playing time and he was able to hit for some average and a OPS a little north of 700, and he can do that while also providing great positional depth on the bench because he can not only play all 3 outfield spots, you could probably still throw him in at second base. I don't think they should throw him back in at shortstop, but he does have a lot of minor league experience there in an absolute pinch. And as I mentioned, he is a good, not great, but good pinch runner off the bench. He's a guy that I would like to see the Twins prioritize in a way they did kind of similarly to Jake Cave, where we knew he was never going to get penciled in to be a full-time starter, but we also knew he was the priority bench player of the Twins because they knew the value he provided backing up anybody in the outfield on any given day.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't hate Austin Martin as a bench guy, but he's just going to be so much more than a bench guy for them. Like he's kind of looking like he's going to be in sort of the Willie Castro role from last year where he's a bench player, but he's the guy that's going to play or get like 500 at bats. And I think that's a role that he's probably ill-equipped for. And I mean, if he's the everyday left fielder, he's getting even more plate appearances than that. So I don't know. I feel worse about our left field group. I think by midseason it'll look a lot different. Alan Roden's probably going to force his way in there. We'll for sure see Emmanuel Rodriguez and Walker Jenkins at some point this season. And so like things are going to change, and the roster that we have on opening day definitely won't be the roster that we have on July 1st or August 1st. But I mean, just out the gate, it seems like a poor decision to make. And also, like, I want to point out that it's not like James Outman is going to suddenly like grow or like get awarded an option. Like, he's always going to be out of options now. Like, he's on this roster, he's not on this roster going forward. And like, if we now have Alan Roden come up, we have Emmanuel Rodriguez and Walker Jenkins pushing their way up, and maybe Gabriel Gonzalez, like, James Outman is probably getting squeezed off this roster one way or another. It's just about the timing of it. And if you're planning for him to not be on this roster at some point in the season, you might as well play the better player today in Alan Roden. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think that's one that as fans we're never gonna really agree with or vibe with on the Twins with. One other big move that was announced yesterday that I at least do agree with. I've been on this train even before spring training. The Twins do send down Zebby Matthews to AAA yesterday, officially announcing then that McAbel won the competition and the job out of camp for the fifth spot in the rotation. I feel like I've already spoken on this at length. So, how do you feel about this, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, just based on spring training performance, I think McAbel vastly outpitched Zebby Matthews. Zebby's velo's also been down in his last couple outings, so I think that's probably a little bit of a warning sign. Maybe he needs to work through some mechanical issues or just needs a little bit of a rest. So I think it makes sense that they've had McAbel, penciled in as the fifth starter. I do still have a lot of faith in Zebby. He's kind of an analytics darling. I know Eno Saris. He has a whole model for grading out pitcher stuff and then using that stuff and their ability to locate and mix pitches to then like generate a projected ERA. And he had Zebby Matthews, I think, as the Twins' like second best starter. He had Zebby projected for a 3.8 ERA. And so I definitely think there's reasons for optimism. Yeah, his slider grades out as an elite pitch for a starting pitcher. His fastball grades out as above average. He has a lot of pitches that he can throw. He throws them all mostly in the zone. So I still think that there's hope with Zebby. And, as a sixth starter, he's going to come up and he's going to pitch innings pretty early into the season, if I had to guess. But I think just for where they're at now, yeah, McAbel's the better arm to keep around going into the season.
I think we do also need to remember where both these guys came from as prospects. I mean, this is what McAbel was expected to do. He was a highly drafted prospect, he was a highly rated prospect, he was a highly coveted prospect at the trade deadline. And that doesn't mean that he has to be better than Zebby Matthews, that he's going to be, but we already knew that McAbel could do all of this. What Zebby Matthews has shown is impressive and it's promising, but it's also a little new and a little surprising. When he came onto the scene in the minors, I remember him being just an absolute command freak. That was his calling card. He could put the ball wherever he wanted. He could paint corners. He absolutely just baffled guys who clearly did not have a major league understanding of the strike zone, and that worked for him. But the issue as he was coming up through the minors was people were worried that his stuff didn't play enough, that it wasn't tight enough, wasn't fast enough, didn't spin enough. And I think as he's gotten higher up and closer to the majors, there has been that natural sacrifice where things are moving a little faster, things are moving a little sharper and tighter and look more deceiving, but he has lost his control, which is exactly what happens to any pitcher who tries to add speed and stuff to their pitches. So these are just natural ebbs and flows of growing as a normal pitcher, as a guy who didn't come in as such a highly touted prospect. To me, the fact that we've seen different pieces of it all from Zebby Matthews at different times bodes well for the possibility of him putting it all together. But I don't think that it should really be viewed as a concern for Zebby that he lost the job to McAbel coming out of camp, even if Zebby is the slightly more established starting pitcher already in the majors.
Yeah, and I will say, like, Zebby did have insane control in the minors. Yeah, he throughout the 2024 season when he really took a big jump up, 2023 and 2024, he had a 3.5% walk rate in 2023 and a 1.9% walk rate in 2024. And so that's elite, like top of the scale, insane walk rates. But I think a lot of that was driven by he had good enough stuff that he could overpower minor leaguers. He just threw it over the plate and guys generally got out. And that was kind of the knock as well, is like he can throw strikes. Can he throw quality strikes? And then we saw he got into the big leagues in 2024. He got knocked around quite a bit, and a lot of it was on mistake pitches over the plate. You know, he had good stuff for a minor leaguer, didn't have good stuff against major leaguers. And so when he made mistakes, it would get hit hard. And I think it's pretty natural that your walk rate would swell then. You know, you try to get more fine, you try to miss, outside the zone versus over the plate. And I think that's good growth. But even still, I mean, his walk rate in the last 2 seasons in the majors has been 6.2% and 6.8%, which are both well above average. I think big league average is right around 8.5%. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Zebby Matthews is still going to miss a decent number of bats. He got strikeouts last year. He's still going to limit walks. For him, it's all about reducing the amount of pitches that end up over the plate that can be hit really hard by major league hitters. And I think that's still something they're going to work on and tweak when he gets to the minors. So, yeah, agree with your assessment. He has some more things to work out. And Mick Abel had similar things to work through, and he's, showing growth there. So it makes sense to go with Abel.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to remember, as much as making the opening day roster means so much for these younger guys who aren't getting paid nearly as much toiling away in the minors and haven't had that chance to get paid yet. So that means more to them. Also, yeah, like this is new to them. This would be for both of them their first chance to break camp with the opening day roster. But the way the Twins were posturing these guys even before David Festa got hurt, I firmly believe that with everybody healthy, Zebby is still the next guy up. So let's both take a crack at it. When do you think we see Zebby Matthews in the MLB this year?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be like a performance thing, but I think probably we'll see an injury to someone in the rotation, which within the first 3 weeks. I would say like April 15th is my date, sometime before then.
Interesting. I was gonna say just the end of April. I think he debuts before May, so I think we're relatively on the same page. And honestly, even if it's not a performance thing or an injury thing, maybe the Twins do just realize that I was onto something here all along, and they do roll with a 6-man rotation. Either way, expect to see Zebby Matthews pretty early into the season. One guy that we still aren't really sure what to expect, if we'll see him in even a Twins uniform or not by opening day, is Alex Jackson, who is kind of hanging out in purgatory right now. He hasn't been DFA'd yet. He doesn't have an option, so he would have to clear waivers to get to St. Paul, but he just can't make the team, right? Like, there's no world where we carry him with Caratini and Jeffers.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about how dysfunctional this roster is, and adding a third catcher to that mix would only make it even more so. So I definitely think there's not a world where Jackson makes it on this roster, barring an injury to Jeffers or Caratini. We did get a report from, and I'm forgetting the reporter's name, but a report from The Athletic did say that they've heard from a National League executive where the Twins are actively shopping Alex Jackson. So it sounds like they're trying to take someone to take his salary. They're trying to, even if it's a marginal return, get something back for him. Obviously, they traded, not a great prospect, but a prospect nonetheless in Peyton Eales to get him. So it makes sense that they would want to, get some return for Alex Jackson, even if it's 50 cents on the dollar. I do think it's interesting that they are actively trying to trade Alex Jackson. To me, that signals that they did not have the plan to, stash him in AAA, assuming he clears waivers with his guaranteed salary. it just shows me that that wasn't their goal, which makes it all the more interesting that they went out and traded for him and then gave him a guaranteed agreement in arbitration and then signed a backup catcher instead. Like it's just very, very weird.
I mean, their first preference is just definitely to get off of the contract because they don't need it. They can find a third catcher, which they hopefully, ideally, will not need to use at all in 2026 for a lot cheaper. But I don't necessarily think it signals that there is no room for him at AAA if it comes to that. I think it more just means that they traded for him when the Marlins were going to put him on waivers, which shows that they had some level of belief that he either would not clear waivers or maybe just that he would not want to sign with them when he did. But they probably just feel the same way still, would also be my guess, that if they felt strong enough about him to trade for him so that he wouldn't even get to waivers, that they probably believe he's good enough to get claimed off of waivers if they do have to DFA him. So I would like to assume that they aren't going to cut bait just for the sake of cutting bait, because there's no reason to do that. But I would imagine that he is definitely going to get claimed by somebody if they can't find a trade candidate. And I don't think there's really any room to push this into the start of the season. I would be very curious to see if the Twins feel bold and thought that, hey, we're going to see if we can try to make this three catcher setup work for the first like 2 weeks of the season. Maybe somebody gets hurt, somebody's needs change, and we can find a trade partner. I just feel like all of this is not worth it for Alex Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, also like, who do you take out of this bench group then? Because then that's going to cut down. Like, let's say you are going to roll with a 4-man bench, as is the standard. Now you're going to use one spot for Victor Caratini, and you're going to use one spot for Alex Jackson. Neither of those guys can play the outfield or play defense. Like, they can't play anywhere outside of catcher and first base. And so now you need two guys who can cover all of the other positions. So that's probably Ryan Kreidler and James Outman. Well, that leaves you such little versatility because you don't want to play Kreidler or Outman or Alex Jackson really with any regularity. They're all pretty much just defense guys with very limited bats. And then that gives you only Victor Caratini that can, mix into the lineup and still give you some positive contributions offensively. And he can only back up catcher and first base and DH. So I think that would be like the most dysfunctional roster of all time.
I don't support it and don't believe it will happen, but man, the Twins have really exceeded expectations at readjusting our expectations in the last year and proving that every time we think surely they can't, they find a way to do so anyway. So I don't believe it's going to happen. It's more just scheming and spitting while we twiddle our thumbs for one more week, but it is something to keep an eye on, I guess, in what is an otherwise pretty finished roster, something that the Twins will have to figure out here soon.
Yeah. Speaking of Ryan Kreidler, I know I just looped him in with the rest of the bench guys in my assumed bench, but I think he's kind of run away with the backup shortstop job. It kind of seems like the Twins don't have a whole lot of faith in Tristan Gray to be, a good enough defender at shortstop to make it worthwhile to keep him around. They've played a lot of Kreidler there. His defenses look good. The Twins have said all the right things about him. And also, I think there's an interesting note from Dan Hayes the other day where Orlando Arcia passed up one of his built in opt outs in his deal, didn't execute it. And I think that's important because basically the way the opt outs are set up for, I'm forgetting the exact number, but there's some article in the CBA that gives veterans over a certain number of years of service time the ability to opt out on 3 different dates built into minor league contracts. And so one of those dates is a week before opening day. And basically, if they trigger an opt out, it gives the major league team 48 hours to add them to the 40-man roster. and give them like an opening day roster spot. And so it's interesting that Orlando Arcia didn't trigger his opt out, because even if he knew that he was going to be on the big league roster, you'd still like trigger it, and then the Twins would add him to the 40 man and it would like nullify the opt out. And so him saying like, "Oh, I don't need to do that," to me signals he's fine with starting the year in AAA. He knows he's probably not making the opening day roster. It's probably going to be Ryan Kreidler. And then at which point you have Orlando Arcia hanging out at AAA as some extra depth, which I think is, not a bad outcome for this Twins team.
No, I mean, I don't know about you. I never once for a second allowed myself to actually believe Orlando Arcia would make the opening day roster. The entire time they brought him in, it's like, okay, maybe there's a 5% chance that he catches fire and is actually worth rostering, but more than likely he was just another one of those solid, steady veteran presences that the Twins kind of want to get familiar with for a situation just like this so that they could ideally posture him to be their AAA shortstop, which is, I think, what they wanted all along. The big thing is, out of everybody we mentioned here, I think Kreidler is the only one who you could argue possesses a legitimate positive tool, being his defense. I think even if Tristan Gray looked like he was good enough defensively to hang at shortstop, I don't really think you can argue that his bat is that much better than Ryan Kreidler's. Not saying that Kreidler's is good at all, but it's not like Tristan Gray has some sort of undeniable bat that you're really trying to get onto the roster. So I think if, especially, you're going to be a team of the Twins caliber, just having any positive plus tools on out of a bench player is a win.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, at the beginning of camp, we talked about how their backup shortstop job was really going to come down to, which of these guys can play serviceable defense, like who is going to be the best backup for Brooks Lee, especially because we don't really believe in Brooks Lee's glove. And so if one of these guys can be a really quality defender, that gives the Twins some options like late in games even to, put a Brian Kreidler in at shortstop, and get a defensive boost when they have a lead late. And I think of the three, Kreidler very clearly has the best glove, and I think his fit on the roster is the best of the three. But again, I mean, going into the season with Kreidler and Outman both occupying bench roles, I mean, if there's ever a point when both of those two are in the lineup at the same time, that's going to be a really weak hitting lineup, or at least a weak hitting like bottom of the lineup. And that's just something you always want to avoid. Like, I feel like major league teams can generally get away with having one position where they have, a very good defender who maybe can't hit, but if you have multiple of those guys in a lineup, it becomes pretty untenable.
Yeah, the counterpoint to that is we're talking about what we think the opening day lineup might look like yesterday. And you mentioned, yeah, the lineup the Twins rolled out, just a Brooks Lee in for Ryan Kreidler, could very much look like our opening day lineup. And that still has Larnick, Royce Lewis, Austin Martin, and then Brooks Lee in the bottom, pretty much half of the lineup. Out of those guys, the only one who has shown himself to be a plus hitter against either platoon pitcher in the last year or so is Trevor Larnach against righties, I guess. Outside of that, like, Brooks Lee, Austin Martin, and Royce Lewis still makes for a very, very weak bottom third of the lineup, anyways.
Yeah, but that like furthers my point. Like, if you don't have a very strong lineup around these poor hitters, then like it's gonna exacerbate the issue. Like, I get that, having a James Outman or a Ryan Kreidler in there occasionally is going to help your run prevention a lot. But if you're already playing guys that have questionable bats elsewhere in the lineup, it just makes it an even bigger issue, because like you're gonna have to score runs somehow, and it can't just be, the Keishel, Buxton, Wallner top three that scores all of your runs all season long.
Can it be? No. Is that how you build team success? Yes. But do I think the Twins will be successful? And do I think that that is how the Twin season is going to end up being? No and yes. The Twins are not set up for success currently. And I do believe that those top three guys are going to just have to carry the offense night in or night out. So I guess I know maybe I'm not even so much disagreeing so much as just kind of already bleakly staring at our lineup and yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I will say, like, it's not all doom and gloom. Josh Bell's a good enough hitter to be an everyday player on a contending team. Ryan Jeffers has one of the highest OPSs of any catcher in the last few years. He's a clearly well above average offensive catcher. So like those are two more solid hitters to add to the mix. You know, as much as we rag on Trevor Larnach, he's at least a big league hitter. He's an average-ish hitter or better. And so, you know, that's six spots that you feel reasonably good about. Also, Victor Caratini's an above average hitting catcher. So even on the days where Jeffers isn't in the lineup, you still have Victor Caratini stepping in there. So, like, I think the top 2/3 of the lineup you can pretty reasonably say is going to be solid. But I think that bottom third with, you know, as you point out, Royce Lewis, whoever's in left field, and Brooks Lee is going to be problematic. And that's part of the reason why the idea of having Alan Roden, who's both a plus defender in a corner and probably our highest upside left-handed hitting outfielder. Well, I shouldn't say it. He's a higher upside left fielder versus right-handed pitching than Austin Martin. I think it would have made a lot of sense to add him to this group just because that gives you one more guy that you feel good about facing righties, and it gives you another good defender in this lineup that desperately needs defense.
And it just gives you juice. I think that's something that this Twins team is going to need a lot of this year. There's going to be a lot of bad performances, bad weeks, sluggish months, even. So while it might just be more option dancing between some of these fringe guys on the bench, I do like the idea of having more platoon heavy lineups, even if that means something like switching from Austin Martin to Alan Roden being our left fielder when we're facing right-handed hitters, just because, you know, even if they hit from the same side, we just believe Alan Roden would be better against right-handed hitters. I want to see the Twins take advantage of all the depth they've piled up, even if none of them are particularly better than the other, just to keep this season fresh and this team feeling new and competitive in that manner.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I think this is going to be, you know, season of a lot of roster turnover. I think we're going to look at our opening day roster and then look at our roster, you know, in the middle and end of September, and it's going to look vastly different. And part of that is like just giving veterans opportunities, and then when they fail, you know, not being afraid to move on from them. That's broadly applicable to most of the bullpen. It could also be applicable to some of our, you know, outfield options. I think yes, the Twins have, you know, $4.5 million invested in Trevor Larnach, but if we get 2 months into the season and Trevor Larnach's not hitting, you look at him and go, all right, this is a guy that we've given 2,000 plate appearances to. He's never shown to really be a solidly above average bat. He can't play defense, and we have young guys who are controlled for much longer who we want to give playing time to. Like, I think even a guy like Larnach could be DFA'd midseason. Obviously, we know a guy like James Outman could be, you know, DFA'd. The Twins obviously have very little tied up in Ryan Kreidler. So if you have, you know, Kalen Culpepper that comes up midseason, that could be a change there. Like there's a lot of paths for this team to look different just from, you know, guys underperforming and getting replaced, or, you know, just minor leaguers becoming ready and forcing their way into the big league picture. And then also, you know, if this team's not good for the first couple months, they're going to sell at the deadline again. And so guys like Josh Bell, who, you know, has a 1 year deal, or Ryan Jeffers, who's a free agent after the season, those are guys who are probably going to get traded if the Twins aren't good between now and July. And then the roster looks even more, you know, different from how it is on opening day. So I hesitate to make like sweeping remarks about this team or how this season's going to go just based on how they look on opening day, because it's going to change a lot. But like there's a lot more paths to downside with their current roster construction than there are paths where I feel like, yeah, this team could be a playoff team.
I don't disagree, but if I'm going to take the half glass full look at it, it's that we still have the opportunity to explore all of those paths. It's like you just laid out. We could field probably 7 different new starters from the guys we're going to field on opening day by August if we wanted to. And we could have done that right now. And maybe you could even argue that we should have, but we didn't. And what we have right now is a different path, the path that we did choose to go down. I don't particularly think that it's going to be successful. If we want to take a stab at predicting the season as a whole for the Twins, I do think it is a slow start into a poor first half, into another selling trade deadline. And then I do think there's a lot of opportunity for young guys to come in and really lift this team in the second half. Not that it will really matter or be soon enough for a competitive standpoint, but at the very least, we decided to kick the can down the road for better or worse. But that does mean that we have a different group of guys in here that do have the opportunity to show they've learned something, they've improved on something, or just that maybe the Twins needed to give them more time.
Yeah, I'll also say, like, I think in general, this team is probably it's probably going to be a really frustrating team. I agree with what you're saying, where it's unlikely they have a super successful first half, but I think they have a lot of the prospects and the young talent to make August and September really interesting. And I think that that is going to make next off season a lot more palatable and a lot more interesting for us because, like, when Tom Pollad took over as the chairman of the Twins, he kind of blamed a lot of the Twins, lack of offseason spending and moves on, how late of a jump he got on the offseason. By the time he was really in charge, there wasn't a whole lot left in free agency for the Twins to pursue. And we saw, Framber Valdez was one of the last options available to the Twins. And, I don't know how competitive an offer they made, but they made an offer to Framber Valdez. And so I think it signals that, you know, Tom Pollad is at least somewhat serious about spending. He's willing to spend some money and invest in this roster. Obviously, I'll see it when I believe it, or I'll believe it when I see it. But I think that if this team shows some level of competence and promise in August and September, it does present the opportunity to roll that momentum into the off season. And you might say we have a young, cheap core of a team, and now is when we bring in some veterans. We bring in maybe a star player. Maybe we do go make a splash in free agency, and we start to bolster this roster. Obviously, that's a little pie in the sky. That's an optimistic viewpoint, but I think what's different about this season versus last season is that even if we get off to a slow start, even if it's a bad first half, there's still going to be things to watch for in August and September that matter versus last year. Honestly, could not be bothered to watch Erasmo Ramirez pitch on August 18th in a game that we're down 6 runs. But, if it's Marco Raya or if it's Kendry Rojas in that spot, it's a lot more intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, the Twins have had one of the more highly rated farm systems pretty much ever since the Walker Jenkins draft when we were one of the first big winners of the lottery. We got to jump up, get into a impactful position and grab Walker Jenkins. Obviously, random event that changed the team's fortunes, but ever since then he's kind of led this wave of new young talent. And that's the other thing we have to remember as we can finally put 2025 season to wraps and focus on something new is that this wasn't necessarily an unplanned exit. Like, to see some of the guys we let go of leave in the manner we did will remain upsetting, but it's not like the Twins didn't have options already in the wings that they were waiting for and developing. I think they just maybe took an exit one or two exits early and got to this point a little quicker than they needed to or Twins fans would have liked them to. But this does at least make cohesive sense. Like if we're going to stick with the decisions made at the deadline in 25, but then remain competitive this year, this does make cohesive sense in the sense that I think this is probably the best 26-man roster that the Twins could have fielded entering the season, barring some crazy unforeseen spending spree, which, let's be real, was never going to happen no matter who the Polads put in at the top. So while I think that this is just papering over them taking the wrong exit and trying to get to a spot the team wasn't at too early.
Well, I think it's worth noting though that a lot of the guys that we are optimistic about and our reasons to have some faith in this team are guys that they acquired at last year's deadline. We spent a bunch of time talking about Alan Roden and also about Mick Abel, and I think those are two guys that they acquired at the deadline who are going to be key pieces to the Twins season and their future. And so if those guys are successful, I would argue that either of those two could be much more impactful to this Twins team this year than John Duran or Louis Varland would. I know that's a little bit of a hot take, but I mean, in a great season, Duran is maybe putting up 2.5 WAR. If Mick Abel is a number 3 starter, if Mick Abel is what Bailey Ober was early in his career, or even if Mick Abel is what Jake Odorizzi was for the Twins, that's going to be worth a heck of a lot more than 2.5 WAR, and he's also controlled for longer and much cheaper. And like the same could be said about Alan Roden. Louis Varland was very good, but he was 1.5 season of success, and now we have 6, potentially 7 years of Alan Roden playing left field, and he could be a much more valuable player. And that's before we even get into guys like Taj Bradley, who I'm also very optimistic on, and Alan Roden, who I'm much less optimistic on, and guys like Kendry Rojas. Like, I don't know, it's tough to say like this Twins team should have held off on tearing down. And maybe waited for that next exit or two, because part of the reason that we're optimistic about this team and it hurts to not have those guys is because the people that we acquired in return are now making us think this team could be more competitive, but you can't have both.
I mean, this Twins team last year, before Pablo got hurt and Luke Keeschel got hurt, did look like legitimate playoff challengers. We're not going to go down that path, but either way, the Twins are at a point that I think we all expected them to reach within the next year or two, anyways. So if we want to look at least the next year and do the preseason thing everybody does, I would like to take a quick stab at some 2026 season predictions, team records, maybe any guys you feel particularly strong about performing well or underperforming. Um, I'll start us off with maybe a bold take here. I think this is a 80th percentile outcome. This is a very good season for the Twins, but I don't think unrealistic. I think we could enter August with the chance at being a 500 team.
Yeah, I mean, I think how I've kind of characterized this Twins team is they're probably a 75 to 80 win team that's really frustrating. Hot and cold, up and down, and maybe go through months of looking like the worst team in the Central, and then get really hot and have some young guys carry us. I think overall, I would set the line at probably 77 wins. I think they probably go, what is that, 77 and 85. I think that sounds about right for this group.
No, I don't hate that prediction at all. I do think what's kind of funny is if I'm looking at who the biggest impactors on team success this year will be, it's going to be a lot of those newer guys we just brought in, mainly because I think there's two paths to the second half of the season here, which I assume will look the same either way. I think whether the Twins are playing well or playing poorly, you still have to see these younger guys like Rodriguez and Gonzalez and probably even Walker Jenkins, maybe even Kalen Culpepper. Some of these younger arms like Connor Prelip and Kendry Rojas, they do need to actually get major league playing time at some point. So I think the question is simply, are we a surprising first half team led by stronger performances by Josh Bell and Victor Caratini? Do we get to June and July and consider being buyers? Or do they perform how we paid them to perform? Does the team do what everybody expects them to do? And do we end up limping into the trade deadline, selling off any of the hot pieces that aren't nailed down to the floor, and just flooding with new talent because we have already given up on our season?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that we could get to the end of July and be like kind of in wild card contention. I will say, I think if the Twins outperform expectations, it won't necessarily be because of the Victor Caratini and Josh Bells of the world. It'll probably be because of a guy like Royce Lewis reemerging, or Matt Wallner's bat waking up, or any number of guys in the rotation having just an unexpectedly great first half. I think that's the more likely path. But I definitely think there's a chance that we get to the deadline and we're right around 500 and we're competing for a playoff spot. And maybe we've had some of these prospects come up and they're looking good and they're providing some new life for this team. I don't necessarily think they would be, buyers, but I think there's a chance that the Twins would stand pat and not sell off their rentals and just see what happens down the stretch and play interesting and meaningful baseball into August and September. I think that's most likely. And then maybe at the deadline, they're making a small deal to pick up a reliever, or they're, trading for, probably still a reliever, but a reliever with a couple years of control who could be a secondary setup man, something of that nature. Obviously, that's pretty far off, and there's a lot that can change. But yeah, I think there's a chance that they're not going to sell at the deadline.
And as sad as that sounds to be your optimistic projection, I think to be able to hit that point already coming off the second half we had last year is just really important for building that fan morale back. I know we've been kind of crapping on Tom Pohlad and talking about how important getting fan engagement back is to everything this team wants to do in the next few years, because they haven't actually put any money behind that to prove it to their fans. But despite all that, here we are, two fans a week out from opening day who are already at least talking ourselves into believing that we could be in the playoff hunt after a season as bad as last year's ended. So I guess maybe that's more of a testament to just getting healthy and staying the course and not overreacting harder than they could have to a poor 2025. But optimism and hope always springs eternal this time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also say, like, this isn't just empty optimism. I mean, Fangraphs projects the Twins for 78.2 wins, and that's over the course of a full season. So, like, we could definitely see some positive variance in the first half that makes us feel like, in August we have a chance at the playoffs, or at least aren't selling. And also, I think that really points to, like, this team wasn't nearly as bad as they looked down the stretch last year. We've talked about that before, but that really was a culmination of a million things going wrong for this team. And even with a pretty slow offseason, they still look to be about a 500-ish team. And right now, Fangraphs has the Twins at a 24% chance of making the playoffs and almost a 12% chance of, or an over a 12% chance of winning the division. And so definitely not all hope is lost. There's a chance that the Twins are a playoff team. They could bounce back right away, at which point, this team is looking pretty good for the future.
Yeah, shout out the Guardians and Royals for both being relative playoff contenders last year, and then also not really doing any adding at all to their teams during this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, the Guardians won the division last year. They went 20-7 in September to steal it from the Tigers and make the playoffs. And the Twins are projected for 2.5 more wins than the Guardians. So, I mean, if that tells you anything, like the Twins have double the Guardians' playoff chances right now. And so a lot of things can change throughout the course of a season.
To be fair to the Twins, we did not lose our closer to a gambling probe, but to be fair to the Guardians, the Twins would probably get better if we lost our closer to a gambling probe.
I mean, also the Guardians played their best baseball after Luis Ortiz and Emmanuel Clase got suspended. Like they really surged late in the season when those two were long gone.
That certainly is the Cleveland specialty. And that honestly has got to be maybe more miserable existence as a fan than the Twins, where they never really enter the seasons terribly competitive. They never really spend over the off season, but they just always seem to find a way to come alive and make you believe at just the right time for the team to not capitalize again.
Yeah, well, I mean, they'll always have the Rajay Davis home run.
They may always have Rajay Davis in Cleveland, but here in Minnesota, you'll always have the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. And so long as you have that, you know, you're going to get our monologue minute to wrap us up. So as always, Matt, let's get it started.
So I'm going to keep mine short and sweet because it's going to come to fruition this week. But I'm just excited for baseball to become a daily hobby again. You know, throughout the off season, it's nice to always have, you know, the thought that at any point during the day you could get a message or, you know, a notification from Twitter saying, oh, the Twins have made this move, the Twins have made this trade, the Twins have signed this guy, this other team that I don't follow made this move, but it's interesting because of this reason. Like, I think all of that is very, you know, interesting to follow throughout the off season, but it's also kind of random. You don't get the day-to-day interaction with the sport. You could go weeks or months without anything of note from your favorite team. And it's nice throughout the season when that's not the case. You know, every day or 5 or 6 days a week, you just know that there's going to be a game on and you can turn it on, you can watch. And, you know, you might win, you might lose, your star player might get injured, a rookie might break out. Like anything could happen, but it's always just interesting to, you know, have something related to your favorite team that you can rely on to happen many days a week, and you can spend, you know, 2 or 3 hours just watching a baseball game, even if it's just on in the background, even if you're not paying, you know, super close attention to it, even if you're driving in a car and you're just listening to it on the radio. It's just nice to have that constant interaction with the game.
Very well put and very on brand with where I am also going to head for my monologue minute. And that is just an appreciation for the sport of baseball as a whole in a game setting. I feel like baseball to me is my favorite sport to just physically attend and be at. There's a lot of like obviously if I'm going to Timberwolves game or Vikings game, I'm gonna get excited for that. But like outside of that, I don't particularly need to go to any NFL or NBA games. I feel like I enjoy an NFL game just as much sitting on my couch watching with my friends and checking my fantasy team as I do being at the game. I haven't been able to hit as many regular season games, so playoff atmosphere is just different. But baseball is to me and will always be the greatest sport to just go to for a social event. Even if you're not really watching the game, even if you don't really know the teams or care about the teams or even know much about baseball, it's 3 hours of your life where you get to go out, treat yourself to snacks, to a cold beer on a warm summer day, to be out in the sun, to be hanging out with people, and have, yeah, just a chance to hang out, chatter, have something to focus on. Even if you're not that particular interested in the game, it's totally fine, as Matt mentioned, and works as more of a background vehicle. But every year, especially being from Minnesota, when we hit this time of year and I see the sun actually come out again and feel warm at the same time, I'm reminded just how much more beautiful baseball is as a sport than anything else out there that we play.
Yeah, so we have a lot to look forward to over the next couple months. You know, that sun will keep shining and getting warmer. The Twins may not get any warmer, but we'll follow them nonetheless. As always, you can follow us on Twitter, both at the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast, but also on each of our personal channels. We also post every week on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can find us there. We post every Wednesday morning, and so feel free to like our content, follow our channels, and we will keep bringing it to you. But until then, we'll see you next time.